For the first time, right, Jews began to come from around the world, gather to the land in unbelief. And today, there are more Jews in Israel than any place else in the world. And literally, the tribes are being regathered, lost tribes are being found and being returned. If that's not a fulfillment of prophecy, I don't know what is. And the second stage is ultimately this great revival that's promised that we'll see one day among the Jewish people when all Israel will be saved. And we read about that ultimately in the book of Revelation as we approach the second coming.
Rabbi Jason, today we're going to be talking about something that I know you're passionate about. I'm very passionate about it. And that is the significance of the land of Israel. So I want to start our conversation today, just getting you to talk a little bit about just tell us about your first time in Israel and what that was like.
I'll never forget the first time I went to Israel. I was in my early 20s, and it was such a special and life-changing experience. From the very moment the plane touched down on the tarmac in Tel Aviv, and it was on El Al, and they played Hatikva as we landed, and I literally began to cry and just felt an immediate connection. And I think just for so many reasons, of course, there's this is the land of the scriptures, this is the land of the prophets and of Yeshua, but then also because I had lost most of my family during the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And my family had nowhere to go. And my grandmother got 2 visas and had to decide who she was going to save first, her mother and her father, or her brother and sister and their newborn baby. Incredible story how she was able to help her brother escape. But my great-grandparents were sent to the concentration camps and murdered in transit on my great-grandmother's birthday. And if there would have been a place for them to go like Israel, who knows how many relatives and family members I'd have today. I've got a small family because of that. And so for a very personal reason, but also just that sense when you come into the land, like I grew up in New York, it's the city that never sleeps, but there's a spiritual presence and tangible just goodness of God, a tangible like reality of God in the land that I've never experienced anywhere else.
Yeah, both of us are Messianic Jews, and so, I think we probably felt similar feelings, just different aspects of the story. But I can relate in that when I first set foot that first time, also when I was in my 20s, I felt the weight of it, from the standpoint of how many of my grandparents and great-grandparents and great-grandparents wanted to be in the land of Israel. And I had the opportunity to do it. And that was really just a very powerful feeling for me. But, also, we're obviously, as I just said, we're both Messianic Jews. But, of course, we've been to the land of Israel with a lot of Christian friends as well. And there's a particular statement that we've both heard over and over from our Christian friends that we've gone to Israel with. So a lot of Christians will testify that they felt at home when they visited the land of Israel. So why is that such a common feeling for, even people that have no Jewish heritage, but they're followers of Jesus and they get that feeling of home? What is it about Israel?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think really simply, this is the home of Yeshua and the Talmudim, the disciples, and this is where Yeshua lived. This is where he's returning. Yeah. And so every believer should have that sense of connection, because going there is going home, because we're connected to Yeshua. That's his home. And one day we're all going up to the New Jerusalem. So it's good to visit it in this life before we go up in the Messianic age.
Yeah, no question about that. So along that line, I want to ask you kind of here's where the rubber hits the road kind of a question. So, and I've heard this said before. So if God is the God of the whole earth, why is the land of Israel so important? And we would agree with that. He is the God of the whole earth, but there is something unique about that sliver of land that's about the same size of your home state or your state of origin, New Jersey? What is it about Israel that on the one hand, it's just soil just like anywhere else, but it's also different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason is, number one, is that this is the place where God chose to cause his presence tangibly to dwell. And so there is a tangible presence of God because he chose this place. But I think there's something more, and it goes back to the very beginning of the story of the scriptures, which, God calls Abraham, and part of that calling is God promises him this land. And what's interesting is that the land God promises Abraham has some of the exact geographical locations as the Garden of Eden. So when God is promising the land to Abraham, he's literally restoring Eden, what was lost.
Yeah.
And so at the very heart of creation was the land of Israel. And what's interesting is that when you look at like ancient maps, you have these three continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa. And it's kind of in the shape of a flower. And at the center of the flower is Israel on those ancient maps, and Jerusalem in particular, because they understood that this spiritually is the center of the world. Yeah. And that's so significant. So Israel historically has always been the center of the world in terms of the spiritual, both past, present, and future.
Yeah. And what you hit on, I mean, it is the place where, I mean, again, God is everywhere. He's in Africa, he's in China, he's in, he's right here in California or Georgia or wherever it may be. But when we talk about his manifest, tangible presence in the first temple and the second temple, it is a unique place. And that's kind of where I was going to say the third temple, but I want to talk about the future a little bit. And I'm going to ask you an edgy question. So a lot of Christians have taught that the land of Israel was significant in the past, that it was certainly significant during the days of Jesus. But there is a significant school of thought that says that there really isn't any future significance to the land of Israel. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on that? And is there, basically what I'm saying, is there any ongoing prophetic significance for the future for Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, I think, there's something called the law of the excluded middle in logic. And it's, and basically this idea of that Israel was important in the past, we know that.
Yeah.
And biblically, we know Israel is important in the future because we know the new Jerusalem isn't coming to Utah.
Okay, fair enough.
It's
some people may think
right?
so,
Some
but
of our Mormon friends might think that, but we know where it's coming, right?
Yeah.
It's come, let us go up to Zion.
Yeah.
The word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Okay, so we know that in the end of days, right, the nations are going up to Jerusalem, okay, not anywhere else. And so to say that it's important in the past and important in the future, but not important today, that's a logical fallacy. It's called the law of the excluded middle. It's not important now, but in the past and in the future it will be. But there's more there, right? Because Israel, I believe, is the fulfillment, the modern state of Israel, is the fulfillment of prophecy. And one of the key prophecies is Ezekiel 37. God shows Ezekiel this valley of dry bones, and he says to Ezekiel, can these bones live? And the bones begin to come back together as Ezekiel prophesies, bone to bone, but the bones still don't live, and he has to prophesy again, and then the breath comes into them, and a great army stands at their feet. Well, spiritually, what is that referring to? The bones coming back together with no breath is the Jewish people being regathered to their land in unbelief. They're not regenerated by the power and presence of the Holy Spirit. Well, that's what happened in 1948. For the first time, right, Jews began to come from around the world, gather to the land in unbelief. And today, there are more Jews in Israel than any place else in the world. And
amazing.
literally, the tribes are being regathered, lost tribes are being found and being returned. If that's not a fulfillment of prophecy, I don't know what is. And the second stage is ultimately this great revival that's promised that we'll see one day among the Jewish people when all Israel will be saved. And we read about that ultimately in the book of Revelation as we approach the second coming. We also mentioned Zechariah 14.
Yeah.
All the nations of the world are going to go up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. So clearly, Israel is important. In fact, I believe Israel has always been and is today God's prophetic timepiece. If you want to know where we are at on God's prophetic calendar in relationship to the return of the Lord, look at what is happening in Israel. There's no other way to explain why all the world is focused on a geographical location the size, as you said, of New Jersey. Doesn't make any other sense.
No, it doesn't make any other sense. And it's just, I mean, we, in some sense, I guess so many generations have thought they lived in unprecedented times. And maybe that's true on some level. But we do truly live in unique times, and that we are in the generation when the Jewish people are being, brought back to the land of Israel. And it's truly, truly fascinating.